Charles, can you explain what a glacier drop is? So glacier drop is a subset of airdrops where if you hold an asset and a glacier drop targets it, you're entitled to that for a period of time. And to redeem it, you have to solve a puzzle. And that puzzle, generally speaking, is some form of a proof of elapsed time, like a VDF or something like that, or a computation, or potentially even a proof of human. If you don't solve it, then it gets swept away into another account, you lose it. So what's nice about this is that from a tax perspective, you don't have custody, you don't own that asset until you redeem it. And if you don't redeem it, you lose it. So it doesn't look like a glacier drop, or at least it's a fair interpretation that a glacier drop probably doesn't trigger a tax event for the user. The other thing is that if you add a KYC ML component to a glacier drop redemption process, you can blacklist people in certain jurisdictions from receiving it. So it's a generic term for doing a modified airdrop where you have to do something to redeem the thing. What are some of the reasons that you believe the mainstream crypto media tends to avoid Cardano news and at times spread hate and lies towards it? Because they don't make money from it. Somebody hates you, it's either because they're crazy, they have legitimate beef, or they don't make money. Or they're all three. It was so nice to see you. Well, thank you so much, Miss Kloss. So nice to see you too. Love you too, Rockstar. I am the founder of a not-for-profit state-of-the-art neural rehab center called VIP Neural Rehab in San Diego. I have extensive experience in motion analysis. Would love to help you out with your project. Well, Brad, you're another person that has won the Jeffrey Seiler lottery. And so I'm going to type his email one more time. And I would love for you to send an email, talk a bit more about your center. And if it's interesting to us, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and connect you to the health and wellness center that I have, and we can take the conversation from there. So there you go. You have it. Please send us an email. Okay. I got an Amsterdam story for you guys. It's a good story. Story time. It's Saturday. Come on. Would you ever come to the Netherlands Cardano Summit? So I went to Amsterdam years ago. And when I was going there, a friend of mine said, hey, if you're ever bored, jet lagged, and you need something to do, late at night, go to De Wallen and get some waffles. It's like, what is De Wallen? They say it's the red light district. I was like, yeah, it sounds like a good way to get robbed or, scammed or something. He's like, no, I'm serious, man. They open up these waffle stands at like 10 o'clock and they stay open late at night. And they're the best waffles you'll ever have in your life. I just blew them off. So I'm in my hotel. It's only like half a mile from De Wallen. I'm laying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I have terrible jet lag. I can't fall asleep. It's like 11:30. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go try these waffles out. So I get up, I walk over to De Wallen. And sure enough, there's these waffle kiosks and there's these guys selling waffles and there's long lines. And I was like, wow, he wasn't lying to me. Apparently these waffles are pretty popular. So I wait in line and I go and I get one of the waffles there. And oh my God, it is the best fucking waffle I've ever had in my life. Belgian fucking waffle. Got the powdered sugar on it. Got all this other shit on it. It's so good. They even do the chicken waffles, but the waffles are just so good. So I ate those waffles. I ate way too many of them. I go back, fall asleep. The next day, whole day, I'm jonesing for those waffles. I'm just sitting there. I'm just like, oh man, I want some of those waffles, man. So I'm waiting. 10 o'clock on the dime. I go ahead and go to De Wallen and I'm waiting in line, waiting for them to open up. And then while I'm waiting in line, someone runs into me, hits me. I nearly fall over and I look at him. He's drunk. He's got a beard. And he says, I'm the Iceman. I'm the Iceman. And just walks off. I was like, who the fuck is that guy? 6 months later, I'm at a hotel again, and this time in Singapore, on sleepless night. I got my phone out, just scrolling through YouTube, looking for something to watch to fall asleep to. And there's a Vice documentary about the Iceman, Wim Hof. And I click on it. It's the first time I'd heard of Wim Hof. And I see him and I say, that's the guy, the waffle guy who ran into me and called himself the Iceman. So there you go. There's two things I know about Amsterdam. They have amazing waffles, and the Iceman will run into you from time to time. You guys didn't see that coming out, did you? Frosty reception. Charles, hello from Nostradamus. Good to see you, Terry. And thank you for the meditation email. Did you do or see anything interesting when you were in Scotland? Oh, absolutely. I went to the Loch Ness, man. Went all up and down that Loch Ness looking for Nessie. And I got the restaurant, Nessie's. What do you think about Jordan Petersen? Now, that's an interesting one. Jordan Petersen is a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant guy. And he spent a huge amount of time in the intersection of narratives, storytelling, occultism and philosophy, and psychology. So he's kind of pulling those things together. And his Maps of Meaning was like this long, incomprehensible book. And if you look, he's almost like a Jungian, but he would never call himself that. But he's in the circle where he thinks a lot about narratives and storytelling and how people go through rites of passage in society. He's a deeply principled guy, and he has strong feelings about how people can co-opt society with narratives and control structures to remove freedom. So in general, when you take a look at a subversive philosophy that wants to come in and conquer a society, there are 4 stages to it. The first is indoctrination. You find some group of people, and those people you indoctrinate to your philosophy. Then they get really excited and fired up about it. You make sure they're young people. So usually you do it through educational institutions. Then those people, when they grow up, they get political power. So they go into the institutions, the government, Fortune 500 companies. And now being in positions of power, because they believe in that philosophy, they institutionalize that philosophy. Then, once the institutions believe in the philosophy, once they get to a critical mass, they criminalize any attempt to not adhere to the philosophy. And usually they criminalize it in a soft way to start, through control of language, through control of culture, social norms, and a concept of deplatforming, the other, exile. These types of things. And then what happens is the criminalization increases until there's actual imprisonment. And then the final stage is gulagging. The areas of society you can't convert or punish, you put them in camps and get rid of them. So this is a model that the KGB used for communist subversion. And if you take a look at the woke movement, there's a lovely book called Madness of the Crowds, where a lot of the communist stuff and postmodernist stuff, they just stopped writing about that, and the same people started writing, or their students started writing about the woke stuff. And so it's just there's an intellectual direct arrow that Murray wrote down and shows between how that philosophy connects to that. So Petersen, he collects stuff from the Marxist revolution, and he looks at the Soviet Union the same way Israel looks at Nazi Germany. He looks at it as the evil empire, and rightfully so. Tens of millions of people were systematically purged and killed, like more than 6 Holocausts worth of people over a 80-year period, excuse me. And there was just a systematic destruction of people. The Soviet system was so pernicious that they would venerate children who tattled on their parents and had got their parents arrested or executed. There's even statues they put up for that. So the state was God. It's always supreme, and you could never overcome the state. So any philosophy that tends to use the same tools and techniques as Marxism to try to get its way through indoctrination, institutionalization, criminalization, gulagging, Petersen, because of the way he's programmed, is going to be radically hostile to that. So he looked at the woke stuff, in particular, a subset of it, the trans stuff, and they're trying to get control over language. And in Canada, he perceived it to be criminalized. And so that's the hill he wanted to die on. And it made him famous. And since he's become famous, he's had this difficult transition where he's gone from an academic that no one cared about or listened to an international figure that has inspired or been reviled by millions of people, with best-selling books, thought leader, invited to speak, has podcasts, and every time he goes on, millions of people listen to him. So it's a huge transition for him on his own personal hero's journey. Obviously, it's caused him a lot of harm. He's had a lot of difficulty with that transition, the criticism, the fame, and he's had stumblings along the way. Like he's had drug issues and these things. He was going through a lot of family issues, and he started taking a few substances through a prescription. And like many people who get hooked, you don't just get hooked from street dealers. You can also get hooked from your lab coat dealer, your doctor. He got on stuff that was hard to get off, and it really hurt him. And it's tough to be in his position, because when you strip him down to his layers, he's an understandable, a bit difficult academic who's very careful with his language and thinks about things in a very nuanced, complicated, layered way that involves personas and archetypes and psychology and myths and stories and these types of things. And he's in love with a certain way of living that wasn't so controversial not too long ago, and sees the new way as something that is basically a gateway drug to a system that killed 30 million people. When you look at him through that lens, you say, I kind of understand where he's coming from. There's probably some kernels of truth here. Let's sift through it and figure out what to keep and what not. And let's engage in an intellectual argument and debate. The problem is that the people who hate him believe him as basically a high priest of fascism and alt-rightism, and feel that he's going to go and destroy society if he's allowed to exist. And so they want to deplatform him. Looks a lot like the criminalization, doesn't it? After you've been indoctrinated, people you can't silence, you gulag or criminalize, and you kick out. So he's just an interesting figure. And the fact that he exists tells you how bad things have gotten. Jordan Peterson would have not been popular or existed at all in 1980. But the dawn of social media and the absence of hope or meaning in a lot of people, especially young men, has created this phenomenon. And there's a lot of people that feel like he broadcasts straight to them and gives them structure and order in their lives, which is why he wrote the 12 rules and these other things. And I could definitely see how people use movements and religion to subvert and take over society. If you go back to the Nazi Party, for example, all the inner circle of the Nazis were occultists, and they created a new religion. Nazism was not just a political philosophy, it was a physical religion. It had rites and rituals and passages, and it had prescriptions for your children, the Hitler's Youth. The SS were the high priests of this thing. They took the Thule Society and Rosicrucian ideas, and they took ideas from the Volkisch ideas that post-Bismarck reunified Germany and pulled these things together. They took some Viking philosophy. In fact, Jung even wrote an essay in 1936. He attended the Nuremberg rallies in the 30s, and the one that he attended had over 800,000 people, and he looked at it like a gigantic ritual, and he equated Hitler to Odin, being possessed by that spirit and that connection there. So there was a lot of neo-paganism that was blended into a very racist philosophy that became effectively a state-sponsored religion and death cult. That's why the Nazis were so incredibly dangerous. In fact, going back to the old Vikings, you had the berserkers and the Ulfhednars, so the wolfmen and the bearmen. They'd take drugs and fight in battle with bearskins and wolfskins naked with axes. Very terrifying people. Well, the Nazi soldiers took Pervitin, which was meth. And the whole army was just taking tons of fucking meth. That's why the Blitzkrieg was so effective. They could stay up and fight for days until their hearts stopped working. Okay, so they had a berserker culture inside the Nazi culture as well. So there was a lot of influence there in these things. So generally speaking, when you want to try to change the social order, you have to go beyond just a political ideology or philosophy. Generally, you create some form of a pseudo-religion. Wokeism is a pseudo-religion. It has high priests. It has rites of passage. It has special coded words, special language and vocabulary, consequences for disobeying it, ways to get redemption, check your privilege, these types of things, doctrine like CRT and the fragility training and all this other stuff that they do. And if you are a guy like Petersen, when you see that, you deconstruct it to those roots and you say this is a subversive, pervasive thing. And because its roots come from Marxism and they push in that particular direction, that if they are allowed to take over, they're probably going to do what the Marxists do. That's what he thinks. And that's why he takes it so seriously. It's not an ego trip. There's certainly some ego there, and he has difficulty with it, which is why he's had troubles and struggles. But there's deep down inside a worry that consumes him in that respect. So, and you see these things. The response ought to be like any other thought leader. You read Jung's essay on Hitler being Odin in 1936. It's not an endorsement. It's a discussion, and it tries to make sense of how can an entire nation state get caught up in a mania that makes them comfortable with genocide. It's the same in the 90s with the Hutu and the Tutsi in Rwanda. How can a nation state just be comfortable with killing hundreds of thousands of people so quickly in 100 days? And you ask why. And it's too easy. It's a cop-out to say, well, those are evil people. Okay, yeah, there's plenty of evil people out there. We have them all the time, sociopathic murderers. You got Jeffrey Dahmers running around. Jeffrey Dahmers don't take over countries and rally a country and inspire loyalty and belief and get such a strong, fervent religious connection to somebody that you're willing to die for that person. They're loners who live on the dredges of society, exiles who take advantage of being able to hide within it to cause harm. But when discovered, we hate them, revile them, and kill or imprison them. So philosophies, religions, these types of things, they do tend to do these things. The good ones tend to treat everybody nicely. The bad ones tend to say that there are special people who get into heaven and very bad people. Everybody else is a very bad person, and it's okay to do bad things to them. Viking philosophies in particular, if you look at the old pagan beliefs that they had this idea of the inner and the outer. And the inner belief is your tree, your village, and the things that happen there, you have one moral code. And the things that are on the outside, the outer, has a different moral code. That's why it's okay to get in a boat and go into the outer and rape and murder and pillage and collect slaves, because you're not doing that to the inner. That's a pagan Bronze Age philosophy, you see. And today we see that, we say, well, that's terrible. The Romans had a similar concept. It was more institutionalized, but people forget that Julius Caesar killed 2% of the world population in his purges of Gaul. 2%, whole world. It was just a genocide. Purged all of it for glory. Nobody in Rome batted an eye about it. You see? And so these are ancient philosophies. They should stay ancient. The Nazis resurrected it. The communists also resurrected it. They created a social order of inner and outer, and anybody who was connected to the past was outer. Look at Generation Zero with Pol Pot as an example, or how Mao purged 50 million people. You see, so it's very dangerous anytime a philosophy materializes that has a concept of a club. And if you don't be pure and live within that club, you must be exiled, deplatformed, and hated, because you're very close, an inch away from that moving a little bit over to now we must use force because they're too dangerous to exist. That's why you see the hate speech stuff and these other things. It's very subversive from that perspective. So interesting guy. And there's just tons of these interesting things. You see them throughout history. And the more you look, the more everything rhymes. And by no means is he the only thinker. There's plenty of them floating around. And it's always fun to listen and hear. You don't have to agree with everything. In many cases, you may agree with very little.